Alright, thanks everyone. What a good turnout. Obviously nothing like a crocodile to bring out a crowd from fisheries. Thank you for coming, and particularly thanks to Tom and Michael for giving up their busy schedule to come along and give us a few tips and pointers about how to deal with crocodiles. We're obviously not quite as exciting as royalty, but hopefully we're important nonetheless. Obviously within fisheries, it's our field-based staff, the chances of interacting with crocodiles are ever present and increasing, particularly our work in East Arnhem Land, where we're out doing fishing mentoring with the Aboriginal people in rivers and creeks and around the coastline. So as a duty of care to our staff, I think it's important that we convey the necessary information about crocodiles, how to treat them safely and be careful in the field. And I would hope today sort of set the ground rules, but for particular projects we could deal with you in the future and develop specific crocodile management plans for the various projects as they're required.
No worries. Now, we're just going to go briefly over crocodile things. Now, a lot of them we will ask the questions after, because there's going to be a lot of things you can ask us which we won't be able to put in our little talk or might not be relevant. Now, a lot of you people, you all see crocodiles, and most of you will know about crocodiles anyway. So it's probably speaking to the converted in a lot of you. Basically, our biggest problem is the crocodile numbers are definitely increasing, which we all know. It went from the 5,000 supposedly to the 100,000 plus today. Now also the population of Darwin is also increasing a lot too, so we get more and more people going to different areas and utilising our waterways for fishing, and we're coming into contact with crocodiles a lot more. The problem with crocodiles is now it's all year round, whether it's a wet season or dry season. The only thing with the dry season is that the numbers do reduce a bit, because that's obviously not when they're so active, and they don't tend to move around as much, and they don't eat too much during the dry season. But we're still getting a large number of crocs. Now, during the wet season, as you all know, all our river systems all flow into the saltwater system somewhere along the line. So therefore we can end up with a saltwater croc up to 300 kilometres inland. And that's been proven like in the back of Timber Creek and all those areas. Especially in Darwin, Darwin's a perfect spot where we've got the Leander water drains. You can't get much closer than that into Darwin. About 6 years ago, the kids go swimming and fishing down there, and we got a report of a large crocodile down there. We put a boat in, this is just during the wet season, we put a boat in that's next to the water park, the Leander drains there. We put a boat in, we harpooned 3 crocodiles that night, and the biggest was 3.2. And the amount of people that go fishing in there was quite frightening, especially a lot of young kids. And during the wet season and big tides, you can go around by a small dinghy and come out Buffalo Creek. That goes around the back of the sewage. And so far we've already got 4 out of there this year. So that proves another problem. And with the dry season, especially at the end of the wet season, you've got all our water receding. So therefore a large number of crocs do come out of the freshwater systems back into the salt. But where you've got river systems, where you have good permanent water holes where they dry up, that's a big problem now. There's so many people are going to these different areas, and a lot of new people who might be utilising those areas doing nutritional jobs. If you've got a good food supply, those crocodiles will stay there. So the chance of encountering saltwater croc are quite high. So that keeps us busy all year round now, whether it's wet season or dry season. So when we first started this as a crocodile, I made a crocodile unit team, which was 19 years ago. We only used to catch 48 to 50 crocodiles per year. Now we're up to 300, 250 to 300 the average every year, and that's in the majority of that's Darwin Harbour. The amount of recreational use in Darwin Harbour is quite high, especially in, we've got divers which are on these gas brands, Inflex and they bring us up part of their risk assessment every morning, asking for sightings of crocs. Now, we have a 24-hour phone call where we rely heavily on the public for sightings, and where they are, whether it's an incident takes place, could be on any Aboriginal land, station land, or boat ramps, or fishing. We record all of these so we can monitor what's going on, or we act accordingly. With the divers, we probably only see the public about 9 to 10% of the crocodiles that move into Darwin Harbour. So, but they got their risk assessment, OHS, which has to be done. Like we had on the Inflex one, just further down across from Inflex, we get trapped in Medium Creek when the sewage comes out of Palmerston. Divers all diving there that day, and that afternoon we caught a 3.8 metre crop there. No one's seen this crop coming. Now in all the areas, I don't know, not everyone's doing different things with their fishing. Of the fishing nets, I can't, I'll rely on a lot of questions after what you're doing, but when you're using fishing nets, or you're teaching communities when you're fishing, the nets there with all these barramundi that one be fishing them too, your chance of encountering a crocodile is quite high. But most of them will probably get caught in the nets and end up drowning. But you get the smart ones that come behind when you've got the current going out, they come against the current and they just pull the fish out of the nets themselves. In those particular areas. Another thing is, which I don't know, we all come blasé, a lot of us all encounter crocodiles, but when you're going to, whether it's a billabong, floodplain, or just freshwater creeks, when you pull up and you're going to do your job, whether it's a day job or sometimes I even say at night, when you hop out of the car, don't just walk straight down to the river system or billabong or wherever you are, just think a little bit. Sight, smell and hearing. Just walk down slowly. Listen for any particular noises, like big splashes going into the water, or smell. Smell for dead animals that are around. There may be like wallaby, pig, or cows, or anything which could be dead around. Now, that could be due to other things, but maybe a crocodile. When you get closer to the water, look around in the water, and our biggest problem up here is that all of our water systems are really chocolate and you can hardly see inside. So that makes it even more difficult, because you don't know what's there. So look around for that sight, smell, even bones in the water itself, especially on the edges. And if you have the chance at night, if you are camping, just put a torch over the area so you can look around. You can't tell whether it's saltwater crocodile or freshie, but if you see the eye shines, you know there's a crocodile there. And if it's a regular place you go to, which we have in all our parks, swimming areas, Inglets have it, Kakadu does it, we have those what we call indicator buoys. Everyone knows the little floats on trap pots. We utilise those, we put them on a little anchor with For some reason, saltwater crocs just love biting those. So that's a good indication of whether there's a croc in that area too. And that's been proven by when they closed Twin Falls at Kakadu. They've done all their pre-season from the wet season scenarios. That one there was right in Bees Creek. A lady was going for a swim. Fortunately, she got a telephone call that night, so she ended up changing her mind because there was no light over the pool. But she went out the next morning, and that was I think it was just under 2 metres crocodile, so she went out and swim with her last year. Indicator buoys, sorry. The indicator buoys, they do work very successfully. Now, with Twin Falls, when they closed that one, Gary Lynn and all the boys, they've done all their night surveys for a week, just checking, harpoon survey, see what crocs they could sight. They had traps out, and on the last night, just before they opened it, they were coming back, 3.2 metre salting surface right next to the boat. Now, catching the traps, they didn't sight into the survey, and he didn't even touch any indicator buoys, so that's why they ended up closing that place down because of later next. And that's an unfortunate thing, we can never guarantee anything. Get the opportunity at night time, that's a good one. You won't see every croc, but if you can put a spotlight over it, or just a torch, you can see those red eyes and you know what you're encountering. And when you, especially when you've got little pads that are going down, whether it's an animal pad, buffalo, cattle, or anything else, try to stay away from those areas and move around because they are opportunistic killers and they can be there waiting for you. They can catch a wallaby or a dingo, we're not much of a problem for them. I know you do your fishing with long lines and everything else. I don't know whether you're encountering crocodiles on that type of area. You may be, but the main thing with your fishing, you know how everybody catches that barramundi, adrenaline starts flowing. The safest way to do it is with a net. Rather than putting your hands in the water, or you just never know what's happening. Now, crocodiles aren't silly. We're having a lot of problems in areas where the crocs know it's easy to catch a fish on a line because they tend to be a bit slower, so we must be careful, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened more. We've had nets and everything, reports of that where fox have bitten nets. We are getting a lot of reports now because there's so many people utilising our waterways and going fishing. They camp overnight in the boats. Fortunately, we've had a couple of situations now where crocs have jumped out of the water and they've not only bitten the cowlings on outboard motors, but also a couple of blokes have been bitten on the arm and the leg. Our latest one was only late last year in Daly River, where a bloke was sitting on the side of the gunnel, it was probably about 10 o'clock at night, camping in the waterways, and he was leaning right back on the gunnel itself. Unfortunately, he moved forward a bit and all he felt was a whack in the back. Now, if he would have been still probably leaning backwards, the top jaw would have probably got him on the shoulder and would have dragged him back into the water. The bite would not have killed him, but he would have probably drowned. A bit like this kite surfer only the other day, he was a very lucky bloke. His sail apparently ran out of air, he went straight into the water, and the water was deep, he couldn't stand in it. And he said it was about 100 metres from the water line, but it's also low tide, so about another 200 metres out. He noticed nothing, the water was reasonably clear for this time of year, because it's not too bad. Back on the shoulder. So he had one puncture mark here and another one on the side. And he was a very lucky boy because he said his arm was up here, the nose was here, and he said as he looked around the corner, his eye was facing the eye of the crocodile itself. Now he done the right thing, he stayed still, but he poked him in the eyes, and that made the crocodile let go. The only difference is he let it go, but the trouble is the crocodile came back and attacked him 5 times before he got back to shore. Fortunately, he had the smaller kite surfer, I'm not familiar with him, and he kept on jamming the croc in the nose as he was tapping him. And he was backpedaling at the same time, but finally when he touched the ground, then he could move faster, and once he got around about waist deep, the croc didn't want him having to do it after that. He was a lucky boy. Picked him up at the hospital the next day and interviewed him, took photos of his puncture wounds, measured a few marks, and I'd say and that's another thing with croc attacks. If everyone asks what would you do if you had a croc attack? Well, act like a squid for a start, I suppose. And apart from that, it's hard to say because it depends on the size of the crocodile that bites you. It depends on how deep the water is. So you have, if it's anything over 3.8, anyone of us have got big problems. But other than that, the main thing which proves to be successful, it has been successful on a number of occasions, everyone seems to poke in the eye, and they tend to let any circumstances you have to worry about. Human survival is something which is obviously works really well. Few people. Launching boats is another big problem. I don't know how many times you blokes would have seen it heaps of times. I've seen it, whether you go to Property or any of those places. At the start of the day, everyone's good. They launch the boat, stay out of the water as much as possible. It's chocolate water, you can't see nothing. The trouble is when they're coming back in the afternoon, they've got a can of beer in one hand and they're out to their waist pushing the boat back on, helping on. I don't know, it amazes me sometimes. If a crocodile wanted someone, they'd have someone every day in the week. Fortunately, they're not obviously too pleased about crocodile, humans anyway, but you never know what's going to be there. So we was at Shady Camp one night, there's a problem crocodile which was attacking boats. And that was right where everybody launches the boat. This is probably about 10 o'clock, we had a 4.2 crocodile on the end of the harpoon. And with the spotlight, he's a bloke only about 60 metres away, fishing up to his waist. We're catching this crocodile. You can see eye shines all around. What a lucky man, you know. And there's a case of another bloke who had a mask and snorkel on the Shady Camp at low tide looking for lures. And he survived, so, you know, what do you do? There's another contentious one which you asked about, firearms, taking firearms. Now, like obviously we always have firearms because that's part of our OH&S. The only time I ever use a firearm is when we're doing search and recovery looking for people. Now, in the areas you go to, I personally, it's up to you to negotiate with your managers, but I believe you should have one. It's usually a false sense of security, but if if it's there, you can use it if you really need it. Whether it's a sidearm, it's up to negotiation between you and the managers, what you do there. I know it's pretty contentious.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
So I worked a lot with Gary Zimmer, and we were at Wildwood one year. I was with Gary, we had 15, 16 crops. At the end of the day, there's some crops that will, he goes, the warning shots are very good ways of killing crocodiles in the area. They will leave.
I suppose there's a couple of ways. I regard crocodiles like humans. You know what they're capable of doing, but you never know what they're going to do next. There's no A, B, and C and D to what a crocodile, how it will react. We've also used shotgun and you shoot them in the tails, even with rubber bullets and that type of thing, just to get them away, to scare them away from certain areas until we can get them out. I don't know if I'd recommend for all private shooters, because you can't do it, it's illegal anyway, for them to be firing shots, because I know you will on everyone in a boat to have a fire. But yes, it does work. You can scare crocodiles away. It's just like people who water ski at Man and Dam. You've got all these boats which are water skiing around. Most of the time, the noise itself of the outboard motors will scare the crocodiles away. There's always one crocodile that won't scare away. Sweetheart loved outboard motors, used to fight for colour. So yeah, there's no one set rule for what a crocodile will do or won't do. But what you did then, or what Gary done, yeah, that works. But remember, Gary could carry a firearm in the boat. It'd be hard for everyone else to do that sort of thing. The best way would probably be, I don't know, probably get out. I probably would encourage rather than. But if it's a safety issue, no one's ever going to say anything if it's a. Any other questions there on some of those things we go through?
We're always doing those light shots. Like in all that area. Always got it on my head at times, but most of the time it's alright. Crocs and carrot with me because there might be a mummy there and the nest is up on the beach and I know that she's not. There might be that chance, but I don't know if it's there. It could just be this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea actually. I don't ever hassle with people, especially in your job situation, having a firearm with you. But it is contentious. So. And the other thing is, when you're looking, we're going to these areas, look for tracks around. But if there's sand or mud, they're nice and easy to see. The biggest problem is man-made dams. They're the hard ones to see because it's usually rock and hard soil, so you can't really see any sign of the croc itself, unless you can have the opportunity to look at it at night with a spotlight. We had one at Annabrew, they just had a man-made dam there, and they set their kids there during school holidays because he said it was the safest place. It turned out there was a 3-metre female and a 4.2-metre salty in there, a male. So we had a trap in there. We caught the female that night, and that day we went out and got the female, and we put a small boat in. We knew there was another one in there, but we wasn't quite sure. And it was one of those strange crocs. He didn't want to surface and show himself. We had no sign of him on the bank whatsoever. It was only with harpoon that night. Kept on seeing this swell, so I said to Robbie, I said, just have a go, have a go. And he ended up getting in the back of the head there, on the neck side, and it turned out to be a 4.2-metre salty, and the dam itself was only slightly bigger than this room we're in. And we was only in a little punt, and he came up and he bit the side of the punt, and I had a couple of tooth marks in it, so I looked at the other bloke and I said, okay, we've got about 10 minutes to get this crop before we fill up with water, but we're safe because we can go to shore pretty easily. Just so many things to look for, be careful, and big CrocWise all the time. And I know it's easy to get blasé. I was born up here and I've swam just about everywhere. But these days, my places are pretty short now. And I even get blasé sometimes, you know. So I walk through there. But just think about it, because you never know where they are. I lived at northeast Arnhem Land for 11 years, and we're on Merganella Plains there, dry season, we used to do all that motion and everything, go along on quad bikes, and the bloke in front of me, I pulled him up and I said, look, there's a croc on here. He said, no, there isn't. The mud was just like that slush puppy, you know, with your bike, I think, the kids love. I said, I grabbed a stick and I poked it in, and this 3 metre croc comes flying. He was just waiting for night time so he could move to another area, because they looked down the some crocs, you see them moving over land, they cover themselves up with grass and everything, so they can move on to the next water hole that night. And a lot of them get caught in bushfires and burnt too.
The relationship between the skid width and the length of the croc. I mean, you might see the skid mark, but does that give you an indication how long that croc's going to be?
It can do, yeah. Actually, I've been taking a lot of statistics on measurements on all the crocs, both especially for bite marks on humans and other animals, that type of thing, so I can estimate the size of what they're going for. But the skids, the size, you won't never get exact size, because we've got one that's had a great big feed, and some of them like us humans will get fatter than others. But you can get a rough size, yes, of the crocodile you're looking at. And also by his back legs, whether it's from the elbow side or the feet when it goes out. So you can get a good size of regional size.
Further out in the harbour, say you're 2 miles off Fanny Bay, and I'm sailing, I've got a rope out back just to get wet. Generally, the crocodile's out that far to be on top of the water. If you have a really good look around, would you consider it safe to have not out there for half an hour, but a 5-minute tow?
I'm never going to say it's safe. Look, the chances probably of being in contact with a crocodile out that far out probably are slim. But remember, there's a lot of barge blokes, old barge skippers and everything else. Crocodiles go across the islands. They've even seen buffalo swim across the Melville Island. So the chances of coming across a crocodile is still possible. Even the blokes in the oil rigs, they've got their environmentalist blokes there. They've seen crocs go past oil rigs, and from Queensland, New Guinea, and all these places. So the crocs are found a long way out to sea. Also, we've got sharks out there, which someone else mentioned. Personally, the sea at wrong time of the year, you've got marine stingers and everything else. Go for a dip at your own risk. That's about all I can say. I'd never guarantee anything. I've done some crazy things, but I don't recommend.
I'd say to put a light, there was a belief that crocs sort of off Casuarina transit from one river system to the next.
Yeah, well, that's the trouble. See, we get 250, 300 crocs per year now. The majority of these are coming around from the eastern side, whether it's our Lade River, your Mary Rivers, and the Alligator Rivers. They come around, we only cite 10%, 9%, I can't even give an exact figure of that. A lot of them move straight into Darwin Harbour, and Woods Inlet and West Arm, they're really good places. We seem to get all our big ones in those areas. We had one from Berry Springs, where the most popular swimming place in Darwin. We've got 3 traps there, and there's one out in Berry Creek itself in the saltwater section. We've got a 4.98 in there. Nobody's seen it. Would have been like a submarine coming through Darwin Harbour. There was no sign of that croc whatsoever. We got him into the trap, pulled him out. So you just never know what's going to happen on that side of it. Most of the crocs come around, they go straight in, but you get the odd ones which come along Casuarina Beach and Besties. If it's really rough water, they come in for a bit of a rest, because they don't like swimming into that rough water. They don't feed to anyway. Have a bit of rest, or they might be attracted by people walking their dogs, because they love dogs, or might be attracted by bait fish. So that's why even with Casuarina Beach, we've got a meeting with the Surf Lifesaving Club. They do their little patrols, and it's where people can swim. That's probably, if you want to swim, is the safest place, but not guaranteed to be safe. They monitor those areas. They have blokes out on boats during the dry season, but who knows? That's up to anyone's choice if you wish to go swimming. As far as attacking goes, not every croc's going to. You can walk to the scrub or onto the creek there, you could come across a croc. Probably 8 times out of 10 those crocs are just running to the water, trying to get away from us. The other one that doesn't, that's the one that's... Yep. All those photos we're going through is just different capture methods and techniques. This is the one the other night from Mandorah. That's only, it was a 4.1 metre croc. That's only a 2.5 metre trap. We have, our traps are normally 5 metres long, but we've got them in different sizes. We can split them in half when we're going for target animals. This bloke, we had to go get him at night time because I was worried about him busting the trap and busting his way out. So we went and got him that evening. And they work well. He's not the record. The record for a 2.5 metre trap is 4.5. That was at Blissfield Park, Cascade Falls, going in the creek for there. I'll leave it over to Mike.
Yeah, nice.
So this is, my name's Michael, obviously work for Parks and Wildlife. My job's quite different to Tommy, so Tommy manages the croc team in Darwin. I do crocodile education, and that's for industry groups, school groups, or any group, frankly, so Defence Forces, whoever needs a different set of CrocWise presentations or talks. So it's a generalised presentation. Just it's a little bit confused with formatting there, but of course you know that we have freshies. Freshies are interesting because we do rarely get people bitten by them, so it can happen. Some people, because of course the salty is the biggest threat, some people think that freshies are benign and harmless. We certainly have in the past had several people bitten, usually when they've approached the freshie and it's just a defensive bite. Freshies predominantly eat insects, frogs, small fish, so eating or biting into a large mammal as ourselves really doesn't interest them. But of course they can give you a serious bite and of course follow-up infections. But of course the biggest threat is saltwater crocodiles, growing up over 6 metres in length. So as far as fatalities go, the bigger the salty, the more chance that an attack. One of the things that I always think about when I'm out bush is on the weekends I often go out taking photographs. One of my hobbies is wildlife photography. One of the things I even notice myself doing is being too focused on photographs. So I've gone back, downloaded images of billabongs and different habitats. It's not until I've downloaded the images that I'm like, oh damn, I can see. I didn't get too close, but I was probably too close considering that there was a couple of photos in the image. So it's when you're involved in doing something like work, like your hobby, like fishing, that sometimes you can be pretty distracted and not focusing on crocodiles as much as. Of course, salties can occur in fresh water and salt water, and most of our saltwater crocodiles occur in freshwater habitat. So just a big salty skull there. As I said before, yeah, the bigger the crocodile, the bigger risk it is. Anywhere close to 3 metre saltwater crocodile can take down an adult, and of course with children it takes only a much smaller saltwater crocodile. Most of the fatalities the person ends up drowning, so the crocodile drags them into the water, and the bite force, the compressive bite force, is one of the biggest bite forces of any animal in the world. So yeah, the compression on your chest drags in underwater and you drown. So pretty grim, but it's all about not putting you in that position that you're going to be able to be attacked. So our main CrocWise message is that obviously we live in crocodile country. Crocodiles move around. Certainly when I first moved to Darwin, it was the early 90s. I used to swim at Casuarina Beach, swim at other locations. Since that time, I've progressively decreased my list of spots. and now it's only a couple of spots in Litchfield, and that's it for me. Wouldn't go down that well if the CrocWise person got taken by a crocodile, so I'm doing it on behalf of my own safety, but also to send out a good message. Of course, they are deadly, and it's also really important to follow all warning signs. There is a perception, of course, which you also understand but there is a perception out in the community that we will put crocodile warning signs on every conceivable way that may have crocodiles. Of course, that's not the case. That would cost that billions a year on a regular basis. So the standard is we'll put signs where it's actually safe to swim, saying that this is a swimming spot. On parks where we have swimming spots, they only open after crocodile surveys and other techniques of identifying saltwater crocodiles in the area. So of course they're extremely common, up around 100,000 now. It's basically 100,000 reasons to think crocodiles when you're out bush, when you're working, but also in your downtime. Of course, living in an absolute amazing array of habitats, including large billabongs. All our river systems, of course, into our mangrove systems as well, usually up in the creeks in the mangroves. But even in places like this is at Nightcliff. I often ask schools, kids, whether it's safe there at Nightcliff, and a lot of the kids sort of say, oh yeah, you know, everybody goes down to the beach there at Nightcliff, stand on the edge of the rocks. That's not 100% safe. Sure, of course, it's safer than saying sitting on or standing next to the sea out at Coburg Peninsula, but it's not 100% safe, and that's a message. What we really want people to understand is that, you know, they can take a risk, but we want them to understand what the risk is. Now, of course, we can't say, well, that's 2% risk here, 3% quite random. So every time there's a crocodile fatality, Tommy goes and talks, tries to work out what the scenario, what the situation was, and from that, each time we're learning a little bit more about crocodile attacks and crocodile behaviour. But like Tommy said, crocodiles are like people. You know, we know what people generally do, but any individual, as you would know, can surprise you by a particular set of behaviours. So also just be aware, even around the city, in our drainage systems through suburbs, we can get saltwater crocodiles into people's swimming pools, spas, even some of the artificial lakes like down at Durack, we've had saltwater crocodiles. So, you know, there's that big safety message about kids not swimming in pipes and drains. Of course, the message there is about safety of stormwater, but it's also a safety message about crocodiles as well. They can move up these artificial drainage systems. Into mangrove systems, of course, and even on the most picturesque beaches. So this is out at Coburg, and that's a crocodile slide there as he drags himself, a big salty, down to the beach. One of the things to be aware of is where you camp. So we recommend 100 metres away from any waterway, and it's really good if you're going out to a spot you haven't been to before to have a look at Google Earth and make sure that you're not camping between two water systems. So often, say Coburg's a good example, there'll be big billabong systems up behind the beaches. It's not a smart move to camp between the billabong and the sea because you've got that kind of traffic of salties moving back and forth. And we've got the resource of Google Earth, and you can have a really good sense of where you're deciding to travel before you go there and the surrounding area. So saltwater crocodiles can getting to the most unbelievably shallow creek systems. This isn't a photograph of the site, but it's a very similar creek. Just a couple of years ago, there was a similar creek down near Robinson Barracks, and Tommy brought me out to the site and we did a quick little video, Tommy talking about what happened there. And what did happen was there was a couple of kids fishing. One of their mates came down with a dog and started fishing as well. And a salty came out of a root system like that underneath, grabbed the dog and jumped in the pool in front of them. Of course, he grabbed the dog, but he could have grabbed one of the kids. Just unlucky dog, very lucky kids in that situation. But when Tommy brought me down to the site, of course, I go out photographing landscapes and things like that. I've been to shallow creek systems like that. When Tommy was walking down the creek, he sort of stopped and we started to chat. And while we stopped here, like obviously we're going to walk further down to a much deeper, obviously a salty creek or saltwater habitat sort of creek. But yeah, Tommy was like, no, it happened all here, and I was pretty shocked myself because it was that shallow, but there was just this little area that was a little bit deeper, and that provided an area that the crocodile could ambush. And crocodiles obviously are apex predators. They're sitting up on top of the food chain. They don't want to go racing around, using up lots of energy, chasing their prey. They want to sit in ambush. They know not to move. Most of the animals you see out bush are animals that are moving. So crocodiles, if it serves their purposes, will stay quite still. Even if you're out in the water, your chances of actually noticing them are pretty slim indeed. Of course, they do move around, as I mentioned before, and of course our population's around 100,000. That means that they're pushing up into creeks that they used to be in at some point in the history before hunting, but we don't really have a memory of them being in those areas. So they're always getting pushed further and further up as the new young males try to, create a territory for themselves. So even when you're well inland, 300 kilometres inland, keep thinking about, well, am I sure that there's no soldiers here? Chances are you're not going to be sure. As I said, 300 kilometres inland, 100 kilometres out to sea, but they can go even further out to sea. Of course, the level of risk is reduced out to sea, but it's not 0%. They can move between countries in the Pacific using tides, so they can be even further out than 100 kilometres out to sea. So remember, crocodiles are extremely deadly. A big crocodile is quite capable of taking an adult quite easily. We fall within their prey range. So a large saltwater crocodile can take a buffalo, can take a cow, can take a horse, a really big pig, not all at once, but they can take them. So an adult human being really isn't too much of a threat to them. Of course, as I said before, the bigger the crocodile, the chances of being able to fight off that crocodile is Of course, crocodiles have a whole lot of ways of not being detected. They can hold their breath for over an hour or around about an hour, depending on their situation. They can breathe just using their nostrils at the tip of their nose. The chances of seeing that in any of the waterways on the top end are pretty reduced. Even as you approach the bank of any creek system or billabong, you're sending vibrations into the ground that the crocodile can pick up on, and it can position it. Best position for an ambush, or it might be just right there in front of you, a few centimetres, just waiting for whatever comes along. Now it's really good not to go to a waterway where obviously animals have gone before you to drink, but also there's lots of different habitats where you won't be able to work out where that's actually happening. you're finding a way down to a river system, a nice clearing. That's also where pigs generally will go down through, wallabies will as well. Pigs and other animals won't go crashing through vegetation, just like we won't as well. So be aware that when you're approaching water, we do recommend that you stay 5 metres back, because in that 5 metres is where most of their ambushing of large prey occurs. And of course, as I said before, your chances of seeing them are pretty reduced. They've got really good eyesight. They can manoeuvre, you've all seen crocodiles swimming, they can manoeuvre themselves around to see in almost every direction quite easily. As they swim, they're not really making much noise or many ripples at all. It's only when they start to move fast that they become quite... Of course, when I'm doing my presentations, especially to the public, some people sort of say, oh, you know, I do this risky behaviour and I know it's a risk, but I do it really quickly. And yeah, you can, they obviously have got away with doing that. But of course, we've had quite a few fatalities where somebody's decided to do something rather risky, but decided to do it really nice and fast. And what's the risk? Well, every time you're putting yourself into their habitat, just extremely unlucky, and there can be a large soft well just beneath the surface, waiting for you to do it as quickly as you like, but it certainly won't be quick enough for a crocodile. They've got a second eyelid, of course. It allows them to hunt underwater. There is that myth that, you know, if you're under the water, you're safe because crocodiles can't open their mouth and consume you under the water. That's certainly true. They can't open their mouth and feed underwater. They'll just bring you to the surface, do the barrel roll, and kill you to the surface. And it's really not much difference to them. It still means that being under the water really isn't safe at all. And of course, they are highly evolved predators. They aren't super intelligent, they're as intelligent as they need to be. So they haven't evolved, you know, amazingly over the last 50 million years, because they evolved quickly into what turns out to be quite an effective large predator for the niche that they hold. And they are really successful. They have a lot of sensors around their body, around their mouth, that pick up vibrations. So they're one of these amazing animals that have a whole lot of sensors that we don't have. We like to sometimes assume that we sit on top of the food chain or sit outside the food chain as this master species, the most highly evolved animal the planet has ever seen. We're just evolved for the niche that we have within the world. Crocodiles are just as involved. They've got a whole extra set of sensors that allow them to pick up an idea of what's around them. Of course, Tommy went through a little bit and we showed you some slides before. This is one of the crocodile traps out in Darwin Harbour. There's many around the crocodile management area. That includes the Greater Darwin area and around the Catherine region, the Catherine River. We do ask, of course, that people don't interfere with the traps. Also, we'd really appreciate notification if the door's down and there's a crocodile inside them. We've had some silly people in recent years messing around with the traps, closing the door, sitting on the top, planking on the top, taking photographs, climbing inside the trap and getting their photograph taken. These crocodile traps are designed to attract a saltwater crocodile into the area. So they are potentially the most dangerous area and really shouldn't be messed around. But we rely on the public to notify us of crocodiles and any crocodile sightings. Rangers, the croc team can't be everywhere all the time and we depend on the public.
We used to. Biggest problem, we actually used to have that old telemetry system or satellites where the door goes down and it's off. Biggest problem is that apart from being very expensive, people pinch them. They go out and let the traps down for you. So you're still being in Darwin Harbour and that type of thing. With the public and all the fishermen out there, they're actually fantastic.